Yes, and I'm representing the company perspective in my short presentation here, and I'm going to focus on the structural part of the companies and collaboration between, and what needs I see from an innovation perspective when it comes to both learning analytics but data-driven innovation as a whole. I hope that you will have plenty of questions if there's something or a perspective I miss out on from your side. So I'm happy to have questions afterwards. And how do I, I need to, okay, yes. Do you see my screen? Yes, thank you. And just a short brief on who I am and who I represent. And I am the CEO of Swedish Edtech Industry, and we are a trade association with Edtech companies operating in Sweden. And we have existed for soon 5 years, so we're a very young trade association, but at the same time, it is a very young industry, technology and education. And we have 90 plus companies. So the main part of companies delivering EdTech services to formal education from K-12 to higher education, but also businesses who deliver EdTech to business, corporations, or business to consumer. We also have that kind of companies as members. And we are a membership fee-based trade association. Work a lot with quality, increasing quality in digital education. And from a business and industry perspective, it's important that we join forces from the industry to develop technical standards when needed and stuff like that. So very broad questions and also policy-wise to inform policymakers on consequences on different decisions. My own background is within the education sector, and I've been a teacher, a special education resource teacher, and also a principal. Had since the beginning, since I started working, I've been very interested in the digital side of education, mainly because of understanding that guys in 14 and 15 years old guys who's not very good at reading, have dyslexia, but could at the same time sit at home and program different games and stuff like that. So I was very interested in what happens in their digital world. So that was my take on it 20 years ago or more when I started teaching. What I have been doing the last year as part of the work in Swedish EdTech industry is that I am a commissioner to the Swedish government's cooperation program on competencies and lifelong learning. And I will also show some of the results coming out of that cooperation, which I think has definitely something to do with data-driven innovation. So that is my background. I'm not an engineer, but I do represent loads of companies with loads of engineers. What I will try to describe today is to try to set the scene of Sweden and digitalization in Sweden and where we're at when it comes to our digital infrastructure, but also how our education system is set up and what kind of consequences that leads to in our digital infrastructure and opportunities for harnessing digital data-driven innovation in education today in Sweden. And I will also give a background on the EdTech companies operating in Sweden. What kind of companies do we have, and what kind of förutsättningar? Oh, I forgot the word. What kind of situation do they have when they develop technology, new technology for schools? And also, I will end up with the needs for developing responsible learning analytics and data-driven innovation from a company perspective. What we see is needed in order to move forward to really harness the opportunities for the entire education sector. And just a short background, Sweden, for you who's not Nordic, Sweden is a small country. We have 10 million inhabitants, and hence we have a very small education sector. This is what the EdTech company meets. This is the market for them. So we have a pretty low degree of students, or market as we call it. At the same time, Sweden has been highly digitalized in the entire society for many, many years, and that is also true of the education sector. And if we talk about Sweden on a structural level, as you see here, when OECD measured the Digital Government Index for maturity for data-driven innovation, you can see that Sweden is lagging behind, even though we have been digitalizing our nation for 30+ years. We're still really lagging behind, and the reasons for that is that we are working in silos. From a government perspective, we can see, as we also have seen in the cooperation program, that we work in digital silos where the Department for Education on the government level has their own digital silo, and then we have the workforce market department also have an own silo, and we can see that overall in Sweden, and this definitely affects the opportunities or possibilities in education. Vocational training, higher education, secondary education work in digital silence within the as government platforms, more than a platform for exchanging data and information. And what we found in the cooperation program was that we have found many regulatory mismatches that where the different departments from the governments give different directions or counterproductive directions, or that doesn't match between. They don't have the user perspective and the data-driven know-how in order to understand what the consequences are for different regulatory decisions. We are also seeing that in Sweden, competencies and qualifications are not harmonized, and this gives us difficulties to develop digital services, for example, large-scale validation, upskilling, reskilling, and also analytics for the educational institutions for planning what needs for skills and competencies will we have in 5 years or 10 years, and how can we adapt our education system to it. So we have structural problems in our digital infrastructure. One of the outcomes of the program and this overview was that the government gave a new mission to, I think, 8 national agencies in Sweden in order to address these questions with the digital infrastructure. So hopefully we will see some steps being taken in order for us to mature more when it comes to data-driven innovation and give opportunities and possibilities to develop digital services to cater the needs we have in society. If we go to the K-12 side of Sweden, we have had many digital efforts being made. We are run on a state level. The schools are run by legislative and national curriculums, and we have a school inspection to follow up on that. But then the municipalities, which are self-governing and also use the funding by themselves. So we have 290 municipalities, and remember, 10 million inhabitants. And I think that the key municipality in Sweden has about 20,000 inhabitants. So it's very many small scale school owners or head of schools. And we also have a free school system in Sweden, which makes that we have even more than 290 owners of the school system. The digital efforts that have been made was that in the 80s, they produced a COMPIS, which was a programming and curricula, and was a national produced computer. And I was in 8th grade and had tried computing in class, and that was mandatory for all students in the 80s. In the 90s, we had a large program also for IT in schools, where directed mainly to teachers, and it was an education scheme to educate teachers in digital competencies, mainly producing text in Word formats and PowerPoints and movie making and very hands-on digital skills. And as late as 2018, we got our national strategy for digitalizations in schools in Sweden. But the year before that, in 2017, we were one of the most digitalized education systems in the world, where the technology penetration was really, really high, even though we didn't have a national strategy. And the thing is that the digital infrastructure has been growing on a grassroots level. It had come from bottom and then up in Sweden. So municipalities have developed their own digital ecosystems in many senses. And what the challenges we have facing now is that we have a lack of this basic infrastructure for technical standards. We have lock-in situations in technologies and solutions, and that gives us a lower data readiness for harnessing like technology like AI on a larger scale, and also on a national level to follow up on the school system and developments. And we also see that the need for, we need increased strategic digital competence. There's a lot of school owners or municipalities that need to have a fairly high degree of strategic digital competence in order for procurement, and also data as a strategic resource. And we do need to see some national harmonization here. We also have the Skolverket, the National Agency for Education in Sweden, did get this as a mission from the government too, and they formed the Forum for Information Standardization in the school systems in Sweden. So we are taking steps in order to harmonize the digital infrastructure. Edtech companies in Sweden are mainly micro and small and medium enterprises, which means a micro enterprise is when you have less than 10 employees, and small and medium enterprises are between 10 to 249 employees. And as you see in the numbers, I'm sorry, it's in Swedish, but I think you can see the numbers there. And I would say that the large part of the companies operating in Sweden are very, very small. Almost half of them are 1 to 5 employees. And that gives you maybe an idea on what kind of resources they have for digital development and solutions. If it's costly, it will, of course, hinder them in some senses. Half of the population in Sweden are users of EdTech, where we count the K-12 sector, the higher education, also vocational colleges. But definitely when it comes to business to business, like in corporations, you use learning technology. As in the rest of the world, main part of the EdTech are, as I call it, very anorexic in the market. The main customers are often the public sector, which is very they are scarce for resources, which means that it is a very in Sweden, since we have so many companies in a so small market, it's very competitive, and the price is really a factor that makes it difficult maybe in order to grow as a company. So that is the situation the EdTech companies have, and also who they are. When it comes to developing responsible learning analytics and digital sovereignty in the EU, we have seen from a company perspective that the implementation of GDPR, which is very good to have that data integrity safety in the EU, have been difficult. Municipalities, institutions, and companies, is difficult for them to interpret the regulation, and there have been no support available really. How do we go about in order to become GDPR compliant, and how can we build in an understanding and also feel a feeling of safety that we are doing the right thing? That is something that we have been struggling with in entire Europe, I would say. And one effect has also been when it comes to the latest development after the Schrems II regulation or sentence that came last year, is that technologies, when you move away from the large cloud platforms, which also offers technology solutions for companies when they develop their products and services with AI and machine learning and that kind of high tech, will become more expensive and will lag behind the development, because the European market for these solutions is not mature yet in the same way as companies, maybe the larger corporations from the US, etc. So this is something that has been a challenge. And definitely something to learn from when it comes to implementation of new regulation. We also expect that the coming AI regulations from the EU will become very demanding on many services and digital services. And we hope that the coming regulations will take into account how the small and medium enterprises, which is when it comes to the AI regulations, are the ones who will be fully responsible for the AI on a legal level. And how can support be designed to help them to continue to innovate, but in a safe and responsible way, and following the regulations and the means of why we do regulate AI. So this is something that we have proposed to the EU, that they need to build in a better support. And what we see when it comes to development of these different and the use of different technologies in schools and in the education sector is that we think that we need a funding for regulatory test beds where both research and industry can work together in order to develop safe and transparent technology and also implement it. We also see the need for guidelines on how to run these tests, and supplementary advisory legal support, which we haven't seen in the GDPR, because this is it has been very difficult just with the GDPR, and now we see even here. So we are really think that this is something that we need to invest in. As you understood, the Edtech companies are very small, and it's a few of them that has a large research and development section or funding. So this is, I think, key that to understand that in education in the entire Europe, I would say, consists of small and medium enterprises, so very small companies, and many of these regulations and also safety and transparency and building this kind of technology is costly. So it is important to understand it, to give good opportunities to and places to develop and test different technologies in a safe way. And I just want to end with a question that I think that we need to ask each other ourselves, is that we have challenges. Education is part of the solution for our challenges when it comes to reskilling and upskilling, and also the result of the COVID pandemic and what happened and how we find ways to strengthen education. And what we see is that this is it's not it's not the car industry we're talking about. It's a public funded sector with education, but it is core for our national countries and also for the EU to make education really in front line. And we need to ask us the question if we can afford not to invest in this kind of innovation, where we see that technology really can be one of the solutions for our challenges. So this is just my short presentation, and I will be happy to answer some questions.